As regular visitors of the John Adams Institute might know, we are an independent, non-profit cultural organization that brings American culture to the Netherlands. Since its start in 1987, we have welcomed many influential writers and interesting guests, with the aim of inspiring you to read and think some more about the issues discussed or the persons involved. Tonight, we are proud to bring you the distinguished crime writer, Michael Connelly. Next week, he happens to be guest of President George Bush. Tonight, he is in the Rotherhood, so I think we're all privileged, and he will tell us, I think, something more about it later on. The Dutch publisher De Boekerij just published the book Lost Light, Verloren Licht into Dutch, and together with them and book importer Van Ditmar, we are able to do this tonight. Before our guest of honor comes on stage, I want to welcome Arno Ruitenbeek. Arno is a crime reporter for the daily newspaper Noord Hollands Dagblad and currently a writer himself. His first book on the life of a drugs runner will be published next month. And Arno will more completely introduce Michael in a moment. A few more words about the layout of tonight. There will be no intermission, and after the interview between Michael Connelly and Arno Ruitenbeek, you will be given the opportunity to ask some questions yourself. It would be nice if you could use the microphones here downstairs to make yourself heard. Michael Connelly will also sign his books after the interview in the hall, just in the way you came in, near the bar. But before he will do so, I will come back and close the evening. So please switch off your mobile phones, and Arno, will you be so kind as to take the floor? Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to all of you. You just heard a selection from the CD Dark Sacred Night, the music of Harry Bosch, which includes the favorite music of tonight's special guest, Michael Connelly, the spiritual father of Harry Bosch. Later on, you'll hear more of this recording, produced in limited edition, accompanying the US version of Michael's latest Bosch novel, Lost Light. At first, downloading the CD proved to be even harder than getting world's best crime novel writer here tonight. I had asked my 13-year-old whiz-kid son Glenn to search for pieces of music on the internet, but even he couldn't find it. And although my beloved wife Annette told me over and over again to calm down, for I had still a month to go, I flipped my lid. Many thanks to Monique and the staff from John Adams Institute for their quest of Dark Sacred Night. It saved me from a nervous breakdown. As always, the answer was simpler than many of us thought. Monique found out that Mark van Biezen from Publishing House De Boekerij had a couple of promos of Dark Sacred Night. A couple of months ago, the same Mark came to me with a proposal. Holland's most likable PR officer said, "How about the John Adams Institute organizing a Connelly night with you, Arno, as the MC?" I was flabbergasted. Me, a fan who happens to be a crime reporter and who reviews crime novels as a hobby, introduce my favorite author to an audience composed of a couple of hundred of his fans. Scary. This happened to be a few weeks after the war with a questionable name, Operation Iraqi Freedom, officially ended. Day after day, however, all the networks and newspapers, including my own, the Noord Hollands Dagblad, were still featuring the clownish George Bush dealing his deadly cards. Thinking of Mark's request, I couldn't help but wonder whether or not George Bush reads books. If he does, I imagine his reading list would be rather limited. Perhaps the children's version of the Bible, or a comic based on von Clausewitz' hinterlassene Werke über Krieg und Kriegsführung. This is one of the many reasons that Clinton is my kind of man. He appreciates cigars, attractive young women, a jazzy saxophone, and he's a fan of Connelly and especially of Hieronymus Bosch. Or should I say Harry Bosch? I seriously doubt that even Clinton realizes that Michael Connelly based the lead character in his ongoing series on a 15th century Dutch painter, Hieronymus Bosch, in whose paintings we find the recurring themes of hell and damnation. Connelly is frequently asked, why did you choose the name of this artist for a detective in Los Angeles? He then answers, and I quote, I briefly studied the work of Bosch while in college. Bosch created richly detailed landscapes of debauchery and violence and human defilement. There's a world gone mad feel to many of his works, including one called Hell, unquote. A print of this painting, Hell, hangs on the wall over the computer where Michael writes his books. Even Michael's company is named Hieronymus Incorporated. And I quote, I thought, Michael continues, Bosch would be the perfect name for my character because I saw metaphoric possibilities of juxtaposing contemporary LA with some of Bosch's paintings. I was planning to cast my Bosch adrift in a hellish landscape of present-day Los Angeles. Michael adds that he doesn't consider LA to be hellish. I quote, it can be in certain places and under certain circumstances, unquote. I suppose he means circumstances like the awful moment on the 3rd of March in 1991 when 4 LAPD cops almost beat Rodney King to death because he was speeding. These images portrayed to the rest of the world the darkness that can exist in a city like Los Angeles. By the way, Michael, weren't you a crime reporter for the LA Times at this historical moment? Our special guest states he overall loves LA and loves writing about it. I think Michael Connelly loves to write full stop. From his start in 1992, when his first Bosch novel, The Black Echo, was published, it was clear that his aim was to engage the reader in the very first page and never let him go, book after book. Author James Lee Burke, he wrote Black Cherry Blues and A Morning for Flamingos, said about The Black Echo, and I quote, The Black Echo is one of the most authentic pieces of crime I've ever read. The conclusion will leave you short of breath when Connelly takes you into a tunnel beneath Earth, either in LA or Vietnam. You feel that you're entering a domain of moral darkness. So, who's talking about Hieronymus or hell now? In Holland, De Boekerij published Black Echo, 6th in series of Bosch novels. This is understandable because the Vietnam link could have been a stumbling block into a debut. I think that everyone thinks of the Vietnam War as a picture of hell. Especially the Dutch, who are often characterized as being anti-war and anti-anything that is made by or comes from the US. Anyway, Vietnam is a far-fetched theme for a Dutchman who can retain his anger against the Germans for 3 generations, but whose wrath goes no further than a vague complaint that he wants his bicycle, which was stolen by the Nazis, to be returned. In Holland, we started with the Bosch novel The Concrete Blonde, and I can tell you, The Concrete Blonde hit me right between the eyes. I wrote in my review of the book that it was the perfect combination of both a police and a legal thriller. Constant tension, strong characters, and realistic dialogue. The Dutch aren't the only ones that started their Connelly addiction with The Concrete Blonde. I've read on World Wide Web, michaelconnelly.com, that about 10% of the members of the mailing list started their Connelly addiction with The Concrete Blonde. Most of these members, and I mind you, there are 21,000 of them, come from the US or Canada. I don't know if you've noticed my use of the word addiction, a phrase I always use when writing or speaking with regard to our guest. Watch out, Connelly's novels are seriously addictive. In The Black Echo, Michael Connelly first introduced the character Eleanor Wish. 5 years later, in 1997, this FBI agent enters Bosch's world again in a novel that was called Trunk Music. And at this very moment, Harry and former wife Eleanor meet again in Lost Light. We realize now that she is far more important in the scheme of things than we first thought. Perhaps Michael later can tell us some more about the future of this couple. Lost Light is full of surprises. The conclusion of the book strengthens my conviction that Michael Connelly not only loves LA, not only loves writing, I think that he also loves his readers. Lost Light also is the first novel in which Harry Bosch narrates his own story. Connelly did the same in a non-Bosch novel with the title The Poet in 1996. During an interview with J. League MacDonald of BookPage in April of this year, Michael said about the change, and I quote, "When you go into the first person, all bets are off. You find yourself cheating the reader if you hold anything back. Thank you, Michael, from someone who wants to know it all and wants to know it now." The current president of the Mystery Writers of America, Michael Connelly, and I may have a disagreement on something. I think that Lost Light is the 9th Harry Bosch novel, while in several interviews he referred to it as the 8th. I consider A Darkness More Than Night, written in 2000, to be the 7th novel, followed by City of Bones. Michael says that A Darkness More Than Night is a book featuring Harry Bosch and Terry McCaleb. So, does that mean it's a McCaleb? In fact, I really don't mind, because Terry McCaleb isn't a less intriguing character. In Bloodwork, former FBI profiler McCaleb gets a donor heart from the victim of a homicide. The sister of the donor asks him to find the murderer. Clint Eastwood directed the movie and played McCaleb. In a short story called Shallow Azul, which accompanies Lost Light only in Holland, I believe, Michael tells us some more about the first time Bosch and McCaleb met. Other policemen, colleagues of Bosch, can't cope with the FBI profiler and his opinions how to solve a crime. But Bosch isn't afraid to try something new when it helps the investigation. And I think that's what makes me like this guy. And I like the author. Michael Connelly found a way to continue the Bosch series after City of Bones, where a disappointed Bosch leaves the LAPD for good. He made Bosch a private detective. Miraculous. Eureka. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Connelly.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I have to say more than just thank you. I think a writer's job is to keep your head down and write the story you want to write and not think about who will read it or where they'll read it. And that's what I try to do. But when I bring my head up, when I've finished the story, and I realize and I come to places like Holland, and I see people here who come to hear about these characters, it's gives me a sense of fulfillment where it's hard to explain. I make my living from words, from writing. I should be able to explain this, but I can't. It's just amazing. I write in this room for the most part. I write about this guy, Harry Bosch, and how he tries to make sense of his world. And to think that somebody in Amsterdam, or earlier this week I was in Helsinki, and before that I was in Oslo, to think that that means anything to anybody, even outside of Los Angeles, even outside of my own house. I would expect my wife to read my books, but anything after that is a surprise. But this means a lot, so I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate your interest in what I'm trying to do. And I want to thank Arno for his words tonight, and also just he was one of the earliest and loudest and most ardent supporters of my work in this country, and I'm glad we could share the stage tonight. I don't know whether it's it's just one old crime writer getting the benefits from another crime writer, that maybe we watch out for each other, but I appreciate all the support over the years. Having said all that, I want to ask your forgiveness and patience with me, because I find it very difficult to do this. And when I'm sitting out there hoping Arno will keep talking and won't say it's time for me to come up here, I think of this story. There's an American writer named Donald Westlake, whose work I really like, and he's been writing many books for many years. And I was at a banquet where he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the organization I'm now the president of. And the tradition is, when they give one of these out a year, and the tradition is that you go up and give a speech and talk about your long history as a writer, and what you think of the work and the life and so on and so forth. And he just went up and leaned into the microphone and looked at everyone, and everyone was waited for the speech, and he just said, "I am a writer, not a speaker." And then with that, he went and sat down. So if I did that, Monique would not let me out of here alive, but I was attempted to do that. So since Arno, I had a feeling that Arno would tell you everything there is to know about me, and I would have nothing left to say about my book. So I was going to talk a little bit about what I've learned about writing the crime novel, and what's important to me. The most succinct way I can explain what's important to me, and I think what makes a crime novel work, and what is important, is a saying that I hope it's a subtle thing, so I hope it goes over. I hope you understand what I mean. But that is that the best and most important crime novels are not about how a detective works on a case. Instead, they are about how a case works on a detective. And there's little difference in there, and in that difference is, I think, the key to this art form, if you want to call it an art form, because it's all about the character. Yes, there's a puzzle, and yes, there's an entertainment, and you hope there's velocity and that you're turning pages quickly, but what it all comes down to is that it's about the character. It's about your protagonist, your detective, and the book is either going to live or die with that character. And I've been lucky that I'm a writer because I'm a reader, and I think I had a sense of this from the beginning. But other writers' words have inspired me and pointed me in that direction, and I've had some moments where it really came true for me, and the lesson was deeply set. One of the things I learned early, or I read early on, was an interview with the writer Kurt Vonnegut. And initially, he was asked at one point in this interview, what is the best piece of advice you could give a writer? And his answer, I initially just thought was like a throwaway, almost like a joke, but I've come over the years to realize how smart an answer it was and how true it was. And he just said, make sure on every page everybody wants something, even if it's only a glass of water. And that's what he was saying is it's all about character, because your character is delivered to the reader by how he or she overcomes obstacles, and they can be big and they can be small, but they all show character. And I took that to heart, and I try on every page I write about, say, Harry Bosch or whatever detective I'm writing about, to make him want something or to need something. And it might be something as small as a cigarette, and it might be as large as catching a killer. And from the big to the small and in between, you hopefully delineate a character. I've come to, this is a very, I've already called this an art form, and maybe that's preposterous and maybe it's arrogant, but sometimes I feel that way. So I'm going to give you a very unartistic way I've come to look at books, crime novels. And maybe this goes for all books, but I look at crime novels like a car. You have the plot, and that's the car, that's the machinery. You have the police procedure and all that stuff is the car. And the car has got to be really nicely painted, it's got to look good, it's got to have a big engine, it's got to have a loud thrumming sound coming from its exhaust pipes. It's got to really be a cool car. But that car will go nowhere without a driver, and your character is the driver, and so therefore he is the most important part of the whole thing. And what happens when you open a book is that the door of that car swings open, and that driver says to you, you want to ride. And we all know, we're taught at a very early age, don't go with strangers. So this driver has to be someone you somehow trust. You have to trust this driver enough to get in the car with him, close the door, and it takes off. And of course, it's got to be a good driver, and he's got to be heavy on the gas because you want that thing to move. He's got to know all the curves, have you bouncing around in your seat, and when you see up there he's going to turn left, he suddenly turns right, and then the next time he puts on his left turn blinker and you say, oh, now we're turning left, and he turns right again. He's got to keep you in suspense. And but again, it all comes down to the driver, because that car, no matter how nice it is and no matter how fast it is not going to go anywhere without that driver. And so when I sit down to write a book, that's what I concentrate on, the driver, the guy who says, do you want to ride? And for the most part, it's Harry Bosch. But I enjoy writing about other characters as well, but I always kind of remember what Vonnegut said, and I remember this very unclassy way of describing a book as a car, but that's what I do. Most writers have what they like writing epiphanies in their lives, moments where they know, first of all, that they want to be a writer, and I had one of those, and then also they'll have a moment where they kind of know what writing is about, or that they know they're on the right track. And I was going to tell you about the second thing. When I had something happen to me, a little moment happened to me a long time ago before I wrote my first book, but it informed everything since. And it happened when I was a journalist. I was a crime writer like Arno, and I was working in a city in the United States where the annual statistics on crime came out, and as Arno can tell you, reporters can take statistics and get any kind of story they want out of them, you know. And we broke down these statistics and found out that our city was the deadliest city in the country, even though it was only Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But statistically, more people per 1,000 were killed in Fort Lauderdale than Los Angeles or Detroit or New York, the traditional bastions of violence and crime in my country. So we had a story, you know, tiny little Fort Lauderdale in Florida was the deadliest city in the country for about 6 months. And so the newspaper had a Sunday magazine, you know, feature magazine, and the editor came and asked me, he said, let's spin a feature off of this fact. And, you know, why don't we do a story on what it would be like to be, what it's like to be a homicide detective in the most dangerous city in the country. And so I was I had been a police reporter in the city for a long time, and I knew the detectives on the homicide squad, so I lobbied and made many requests, and over time, eventually I wore them down, and they agreed to let me spend 1 week with the homicide squad. And I was given a pager like they all wear, and was told that, you know, when we get a case, when we get a call, you'll get paged, and you can just be with us. You can, total access. And so it ended up being maybe the most influential week of my life because of the things I saw. And I, unfortunately, I mean, the contradiction about being a reporter is, you're a police reporter, is that your best weeks or your best days are people's worst days, because a big story is a really bad story for somebody else. And it ended up being a very busy week for the homicide squad. They had 3 murders in 7 days. And so we were on the run, and all these murders occurred at night, so I was woken up in the middle of the night by my pager 3 times and went out to the scene, and I went with these detectives through the week, you know, through the morgue, through the telling of loved ones that someone was dead. I saw a lot of things, very emotional things that I had never seen before as a reporter, and it all has, and I think the story, what I'm telling you, happened in 1986. So all these years later, it stays with me and it comes up in my writing. But one thing I noticed at these 3 separate homicide scenes was the sergeant in charge of the squad had this little ritual or routine where at some point he would approach the victim, who each time happened to be lying on the ground rather than in a chair or a bed or something. They were always on the ground, and he would squat down next to the body, and he wore glasses. He took off his glasses and hooked the earpiece in his mouth, and he would close his eyes for a minute, and it almost looked like he was saying a prayer over the body or having some kind of communion or something. And it was just a little thing. I scribbled it in my notebook, and then the next time I was out on the crime scene with him, I saw I did it again. I scribbled it in there. I knew it would be a little scene, a little anecdotal scene in my story. And so, cut to the 7 days later. It's been a very busy week. None of us have had much sleep, but it's been a thrilling week for me because I have this secret hope of writing crime novels one day, and I've seen so much that I know will end up in my efforts in that regard. And I'm sitting in the sergeant's office basically saying goodbye. It's my last 5 minutes of 7 days on the story. And I'm turning in my pager, and I'm asking a couple of wrap-up questions. And he takes off his glasses and drops them on his desk and rubs his eyes because he's so sleep-deprived from the week. And I noticed on the desk, I see his glasses. I see the plastic earpiece has a very deep groove in it that his teeth have cut into it. And so I suddenly realized when he's over the body doing this ritual, his jaw is clenched so tight that he's cutting into the hard plastic of his spectacles. And I suddenly, that was the a writing epiphany. I suddenly realized that I had spent 7 days with these people, and that is the most important thing that I've seen, because it opened a window into his life. It showed a lot about the tradition, the relationship between his own life and his work, what it does to him. It just said so much about him in one tiny little detail. And I tell you that long story because that's what my life is about now. My life is the pursuit of that tiny detail. That telling detail, though I will deliver it in fiction, is what opens up the world to my reader. And that's how you get them to get into the car. And that's how you show the character that you want to connect to your reader. So I guess what I'm saying is there's that saying that God is in the details. Well, character is in the details too. It's always small little moments. You know, the glasses, which I've never used in a novel. I used it in that story, but someday I will use that, I think, in a novel, and I think it will be just as powerful as it was in nonfiction feature writing. It became the most important part of that story, and someday, maybe when Harry Bosch is old enough that he has to wear glasses, the same thing will happen again with him. And the one thing I always have to keep mindful of in the pursuit of these telling details is that it's all about quality, not quantity. I think early on I made mistakes where I thought description was character, where I thought many details would be character, and I've learned over the years and the books and the writing to cut it all down. Less is always more, if that less is a quality. Is one of those legitimate windows that opens up the world, who says something about your character. Let me try to give you a couple of examples. You get these windows open through, for example, I think Harry's a guy if I had to describe Harry Bosch in one word, it would be relentless. And so how do I open a window that shows his relentlessness? And you can never say Harry Bosch is a relentless guy. You can never have him say, hey, I'm relentless, you know. You have to show that through action and through tiny moments. And and when you make those moments, they become the happiest moment of your week. That's what writing's about. That's when you just feel, you get up and want to take a walk around the block because you're so happy when you've discovered one of these moments and gotten it on paper. I wanted to show how Harry was relentless and how he, I'm always trying to look for places to show this, but here's an example. I wanted to show this. I wanted to show that he has no time for fools. There's somebody dead. We have to find out who did it, and I don't have time for bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is often the obstacle that Harry must navigate in these books. And so there's a scene where he went into a large city office building full of tiny little cubicles full of bureaucrats, barely enough room to get around their desk to get into their cubicle, and he asked for some information he needed on an investigation, and he had not followed the proper procedure or done the right forms, and so he was denied. And the bureaucrat who denied him finished him off by leaving her desk, and she got up and had to almost do a little pirouette to get around her desk because her cubicle was so small, and left him there high and dry without the information he needed. So Harry just kind of walked to the side of her desk and with his hip nudged it over 1.5 inches, and then he left. And because he knew when she does her well-practiced and often repeated pirouette, she was going to hit her desk, and she had a tall drink on there, and it was going to get knocked over, and all these things would happen. And in a way that's funny, and in a way it might even be mean, but it said so, I believe it said so much about his character, and it became one of those windows. And so that's what I would say I'm all about. Quality, not quantity, and looking for those windows that will open the world to Harry. You know, this evolution of the crime novel to the point where, as I say, it's character first. Character is the predominant thing at work in these books. The evolution continues. The classic writers, I would say this feeling is not my own. It's not my own. I'm not the first practitioner of it, but it's something that's maybe in the last 20 to 30 years has become the prevalent way of approaching these kind of books. Before that, it wasn't. It was all about the issue that the case is about, the plot. I mean, one of the classic writers in the crime fiction is a guy named Ross MacDonald, who was very popular in the 60s and 70s, and he once said of his own character, Archer, if he turns sideways, he disappears. And what he was saying is, I'm not interested in his character. I don't want you to know anything about him. All I want is him to be the flashlight that puts the light on an issue that I'm interested in. And he was the best of his time, and I think what he was doing then wouldn't work too well now. I think the whole genre of crime fiction has evolved to the point that it's almost an investigation by coincidence. It's really about the detective. And I think in my country, it's evolving further with what happened on September 11th, 2 years ago. I mean, that has obviously changed my country and it's changed the world, and it has kind of changed the way most of the crime writers I know are doing their work, and it's changed me. And I think my books since September 11th have taken on a more serious tone, but more than that, they have become more reflective of the larger picture of the social ills and changes in my country. And so if I just want to finish up with a little bit more. Arno already talked about Lost Light, but that, I think it's most illustrated in that book. And I'm not here to say look at me, I'm the only guy doing this. I'm one of many people doing it, but it's just something that I've noticed. And I think that is the next evolution of the crime novel, that they will become more political, if you will, more of a mirror. The writers I know are more interested now in holding up a mirror and saying, this is what's going on right now. It's just what we want to do. And laws were quickly changed in my country after 9/11 to make it easier for police and the federal agents to catch terrorists, but in making it easy, or supposedly making it easier for them to catch terrorists, they made it easier for them to invade everyone's personal freedoms. And so there's a strong and valid debate going on right now about, did we act too fast? Did we give up some hard-won freedoms that we've had for a couple centuries in order for a more immediate comfort or feeling that we were going to possibly stop the next terrorist act? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something that has gripped me and I wanted to write about. And so that is a sub-theme in Lost Light, and if you get a chance to read this, maybe hopefully you will pick up on this and the questions that it asks. So that's where I stand now. I think I've told you all my secrets, and Arno's told you all about my life. One thing I should correct about Arno is the picture of hell by Hieronymus Bosch did hang over my desk for many years, and then I became a father, and as everyone knows, that changes your life and it makes your life better. And I had a change of heart, and the painting Hell was part of a triptych that included a picture of heaven, and it includes angels escorting people through a tunnel to the light, and now that is what hangs over my desk. So Arno, let's have some questions. Thank you. It's a lot of papers.
It is. originally I wanted to start with a couple of questions about Lost Light, but since you talked about the political thing, I maybe ask a couple of questions about that issue. As I understand, a few reviewers in the United States wrote that Connelly goes political. They found out there's a certain anti-Bush sentence in Lost Lights. Could you tell us some more about this incident?
Well, it's actually, it's not an anti-Bush sentence. It was received as such, because I don't think, well, what the sentence is very provocative. At one point, Harry Bosch says to an FBI agent, "It used to be a free country." So if you take that out of context, or put it into context that we've changed laws that make, that some people say means we're moving towards a police state, yeah, that would be anti-Bush. But that's the problem. It was taken out of context. Harry Bosch does say the line, but he says it with a purpose in mind of inflaming that agent, of getting him angry, getting him off his game so that maybe he can get something else from him. And that subtlety was lost in this situation. And I think it's kind of funny, and ultimately it's my responsibility. I should have seen that coming when I used such a strong line in such how do I want to say it, complicated or difficult political times in my country. It's becoming very difficult in my country to raise any kind of question or any kind of protest without being slapped down as unpatriotic or not loving the country. And you know, Harry Bosch is a guy who served in Vietnam, did not run from the war, kind of had to go into it because people of his economic class didn't have the opportunity to go to college and so forth. So I mean, he served the country, and I think he loves the country. And so when he would say it used to be a free country, I think it should have been taken in the context.
Okay, but if your character Bosch says such things, I believe reviews think Connelly says this kind of thing.
Well, there is that danger that whatever any character says. I mean, I've had characters use racial slurs in my books. Does that mean that I use them, or that's what I feel? No. I mean, you know, I think if you start being held as the author responsible for everything a character says in a book, then what's the next step? Because I write about murder investigations, are you condoning murder? You know, it's just kind of ridiculous.
Okay, that's ridiculous, but still, it's because it's politics. It's otherwise. It's just a point of critic to Connelly. You're going by politics, I believe.
Well, I mean, to say I'm going political is probably acceptable because, like, this book deals with that issue. It's an issue very much of the moment. That's part of the power of crime novels. They're very immediate. Since 9/11, I've published 3 books, and there's references to it in all of them. They're all subtle. This obviously wasn't subtle enough. I made a mistake with that. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it's good to have this kind of controversy. It came up a few times when I was promoting the book, you know, where people would say, Harry Bosch says it used to be a free country. Is that what you think, you know? And so it got a more spirited debate or a discussion going than you usually have at a book signing. They're usually rather sedate, so, you know.
Okay. Next week or this weekend, you have to be at the National Book Festival. You have to go over it again about this issue? Did it a political thing, I believe?
I don't know if I will. I mean,
Oh.
if
You're still
if
welcome.
George Bush is reading books and he read this, then maybe he'll have something to say to me about it. But I kind of doubt it will come up. It will. I mean, what it is a big festival in Washington D.C. 100,000 people come, and I think about 25 writers or 30 writers spend a half hour discussing their work, one right after the other, and it's a pretty fantastic thing because it's all geared towards getting people to read books, and that's my business, and so it's important to me. But whether it was my business or not, the number of people reading books is on the decline. So anything that can be done to change that, I think, is a worthy thing to do. Not only because it's my business, but because just think if you could not take the adventures you take through books. All of us are here because we read books, but there's many people who don't read books, and just think about what they're missing. So when politics aside, I don't care whether it's George Bush or Bill Clinton, this happened to be the Bush's idea. They started it after he was brought into office, and so it's a good idea. So I'm going to go there, and hopefully my supposed politics that are in this book won't come up, but I'll be prepared now that I've had it to discuss it with you. I'll know what to say.
Do you know if Bush has read a book, a novel from Harry Bosch or one of your other novels?
Well, I know it was reported. There was a book about his campaign for election, and in that book, it describes. There's one chapter that describes flying with Bush on his campaign plane, and in that, it says he was reading my book, The Concrete Blonde, which is kind of funny because Clinton read that book too, and so I have these two presidents on the opposite end of the spectrum reading my book. So that means I've been very good at keeping politics out of it, and I've made a big mistake with this one, I guess.
Clinton has written you a letter or phoned you about something in a book, I believe. Could you tell me something more about that?
No, I've met him twice. One time, the first time was like a rather shocking thing. I was just at home and the phone rang, and it was someone from what they call the White House Signal Office, which I have no idea what that means, but they assumed I would know, and I thought it was someone, a friend or something, playing a game on me, and he called back, and so they said the catch was he's I think they call it a closed landing. I said, what's a closed landing mean? He says there won't be anyone else there because he's landing in the middle of the night. If you're interested in going, he'd like to meet you when he gets off the plane. And so I went, and it was a closed landing. There's no one else around other than security, the Secret Service. And it was like 2:30 in the morning, and when he came down, I got to say, "Welcome to LA, Mr. President." And they told you, they give you a script. I couldn't say anything else. The guy said, "This is what you say to him." And then if he wants to say anything else to you, he'll tell you. But if he doesn't, if he's tired, then get out of the way. And I thought, well, wait a minute, didn't you guys call me? But anyway, it ended up he wanted to talk a little bit, so I had 3 minutes with the president, and it was very interesting. And then, of course, the following year, I get asked to go to $1,000 a plate dinner. So the payback was there, and I went to that. And I did go to that, and I got a chance to see him again. But we had this relationship, or I should say, I had a relationship with someone who signed letters from him. But I would send every one of my books to him. As they came out every year, and I would get a thank you note and maybe a line about the book, so it was kind of nice.
Okay.
Now, whether he actually saw the books or wrote those letters, they had a nice White House seal on them.
About the Lost Light, Harry Bosch and Eleanor Bush meet again. They're going to live happily after ever?
If you know Harry Bosch, you know that's not to be. I mean, I think Harry Bosch has fleeting moments of happiness. I always say that, fleeting moments. And this book probably has the highest and happiest moment of the whole series in it. But knowing what I know about Harry, it's not meant to last, because I think what makes him interesting are his obstacles, are the things that hurt him, are his torments. And so unfortunately for him, I have to make things difficult for him. So even in the high moment in this book, there are, if you read it closely, you'll see there are cracks in that moment, and those are widened in the stories ahead.
Mm-hmm. Will we read about the both of them in your next novel?
Yes, my next novel is done. I just finished it about a week ago, and it has Harry Bosch in it, and Eleanor's in it.
And what interests me a lot is Harry Bosch, will he stay a private eye?
In the next book, he is a private eye, and it is again written in first person. But right now, what I'm trying to do is keep Harry Bosch alive, and what I mean is in a literary sense. I have to keep myself plugged in and excited about writing about him. And I've found, after so many books, whether it's 8 or 9, whatever your count is, I'll agree with. I have found with so many books, I have to increase the changes in his life. I wrote 8 or 9 books, whatever it is, with him as a cop, and but now I feel that I have to change him quite often. So I've written 2 books with him as a private eye, and in this new book, it's called The Narrows, is an opportunity for him to return to police work if he wants to, and I leave that open-ended. So the next time I write about him, I'll decide then where he's at. I don't want to plan too far ahead.
You revealed a little secret to us yesterday evening. You told these are facts. This is non-fiction. There's a change in the board of the LAPD.
Right.
Could you tell me?
Well, the trick to what I do is I still use, or I try to use, a lot of my reporting skills. And so I try to create an environment of the Los Angeles Police Department and the city of Los Angeles that is accurate as I can get it. And against that, I plant my fiction, my characters. Harry Bosch obviously is fictional. He's the made-up part, but what I try to get accurate are the politics and practices of the LAPD. And the Los Angeles Police Department, starting with Rodney King in 1991 and probably ending with 5 years later with O.J. Simpson getting off of the charge of murder, went through 5 years of terrible turmoil and villainy and all things that were deserved. It was a Hieronymus Bosch painting. And they've been trying to recover from that ever since. And they are recovering. And one of the things they recently did was bring in a chief from the outside. It was a chief that had served as police chief in New York City and Boston, both places that needed reform, and he went in there and reformed. And so this new chief has been operating for almost 2 years now in Los Angeles. And one of the things he did was say, hey, back when we had the dark ages of Rodney King and all that, we lost a lot of good detectives because they were fed up with what the department, the black eye after black eye, and they quit. And he said, let's find them, let's hire them back if they want to come back, because they know how to solve cases. And so they've instituted a program of hiring back veteran detectives, and so that fell right into my lap. I could, if I want, I can bring Harry back under that program. And someone might read that, if I do it, and think, oh, he just created this to get Harry back in, but it's actually something that's happening.
Mm-hmm. This book, when will it be published in the United States?
In the United States, probably in April, and hopefully around then or soon after here.
In Holland, okay. What was the most fun part about writing Lost Light?
When I first started writing about Harry Bosch 9 or 10 books ago, we were completely different. I thought it would be a fun writing exercise to write about someone who was unlike me. So whenever I had to make a choice about him, I took the opposite of me. I come from a big family. I made him an orphan. I've been married for a long time. I made him unable to sustain a relationship. I don't smoke. He smoked. Every little thing I could. We had a secret thing in common, and that was that we were both left-handed. And but that was 10 books ago, and so it's very hard to sustain that difference over time with a character that you're lucky enough to be able to keep writing about. So over time, we've grown closer, I guess you could say, in the worldview. He still kind of operates in a way that I'm not, but the way we look at Los Angeles, our hopes for Los Angeles, and maybe the way we look at the world past Los Angeles have kind of entwined together very close. And so in Lost Light, I felt I was really bringing a lot of my sense of life and the world into Harry's, and most notably, because I'm a father, I was able to communicate some of those feelings and put them into Harry.
Do we have a premiere tonight with a translation of Shallow Azul? It is sold now in the hall of the Rode Hoed. I've heard it wasn't published in the U.S.
Yeah, I found out about this last night. It was two things were at work in this book. A few books ago, I had a book called A Darkness More Than Night, which was Harry Bosch and Terry McCaleb working together on a case. And in that book, they make references to how they've known each other for a while. And so what I did was, about the time that book came out, I wrote a short story about an earlier case they worked on. So I just wanted to work out their prior history, so I would kind of have a sense of it. And the other thing I did with that was I experimented with Harry Bosch in first person. So this story is the real first time I wrote about Harry Bosch in first person. Mm-hmm. And I just put it on my website. I put it on my website I think the day that book came out. And that's where it was, and now it's actually published, really published for the first time.
In Holland?
Right.
Okay.
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
It's the first time it's ever been published. Unfortunately, I won't be able to read it, because it's
We translate it for you. As a child, you wanted to be a film guy, if not a director. I read an article.
How'd you know that?
I read an article written by Stephen Feller of The Sun. You still consider to do something about in the film business?
Well, it's tempting because I have spent so much time in Los Angeles, and it's an industry and an art form that is so prevalent in that city. And so I just think as a writer, I'm interested in other ways of telling stories. So I have gotten involved in writing screenplays and television shows, not with much success so far, but because I haven't had that success, I'm more driven, I think, to do it, to get something made, to get a story on film that I write, and so that will be something I'm pursuing.
You're not content with a bloodwork movie Clint Eastwood made?
No, I mean that was a fun experience, and obviously I think a compliment to my work that he would want to do it. But I had really nothing to do with that other than a couple days I went and watched them filming it.
And you've seen the result, you've seen the movie, and what's your idea about it?
Well, don't get this back to Clint, but the experience, as I said, was good. Put it this way: I'm influenced as a writer of crime novels. I'm easily as influenced as much by films as I am books, and Clint Eastwood has influenced me. There's definitely seeds of in Harry Bosch, you can see the seeds of Dirty Harry, for one example. And so it was very, very cool to have this guy who influenced me as a writer say, hey, I want to portray a character that you have created. And so that part was very neat. And then the whole ego-driven thing about going to a set where they're making a movie and it's like a desert tent city, all these people, 150 people all working on this idea that just came out of your head. It's just pretty amazing. So that makes it all a good experience. Now, if you just kick that out and just say, let's talk about the film, well, the film to me is a bit disappointing because it veered pretty wildly from my book, and it was not met with critical or even financial success. So, it's just one of these things that didn't work out. And good luck to Clint, and hopefully good luck to me with my next one.
Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry inspired you. I've also read you were inspired by Raymond Chandler, and especially his book, The Long Goodbye. Could you tell me something more about this?
Well, I'm actually, it's almost as I say, I'm inspired by movies as much as books. It's a movie and book story. And when I was talking up there about the writer's epiphany, the story I told you was the one that kind of put me on the right track of what I needed to do. This is the story about what made me want to be a writer. I had read crime novels almost all my young life, all my teenage years, but I never thought about being a writer of these kind of books. And then I went off to college, and I was in a study program that headed me towards being a builder of houses, building construction, because that's what my father did. And I went to the student union, had movies for very inexpensive on Monday nights, and I just would go to them no matter what was playing because they were so inexpensive and I hated studying or whatever. And anyway, so I went to one movie, and it was Robert Altman was the director, and it was I believe it was the 1971 movie, although I didn't see it till like 74, of The Long Goodbye. And I had never read, even though I'd read a lot of crime novels, somehow I had never read Raymond Chandler. And I liked that movie, and the next day I went to the bookstore and bought the book. And I loved that book, and then I stopped going to class and bought all of Raymond Chandler's books. And so for about 2 weeks, I stayed in my dormitory room and just read Raymond Chandler. And when I came out of that tunnel at the end of 2 weeks, I called home and I told my dad I would not be taking over the family business, that I was going to try to be a writer.
J. Lee MacDonald from Bookpage says, the best fictional detectives are mysteries unto themselves, hard-bitten, world-weary, troubled souls who keep the dark, uncomfortable corners of their past clearly marked off limits by yellow police tape. The moodiest of the lot is Harry Bosch. In this regard, did you enjoy interviewing Bosch on the 1st of April this year, last year?
Yeah, I did. That was another website thing. Website's been very important. I think there's probably many people here that might have known about this thing because of my website. And so I've come to really rely on that and want to offer new things about Bosch and short stories and so on and so forth through the website. And we just thought, because I was going to move into first person with him, that the reader would be getting closer to him, and also there was some aspects of the book before that, City of Bones, that I thought might need follow-up explanation, and so I sat down with Bosch in a cafe and interviewed him, and it was fun.
Is it true Bosch agreed to the recording only on the condition that it would be presented on site in its entirety?
Yeah, no editing. Smart. It was a smart move.
And did he leave the LA cyber cafe called the Frontal Lobe after you've called him a dog catcher?
Yeah, that's right.
Was he angry or?
No, he was just Harry Bosch. The thing about Harry Bosch, this is what I've always kind of felt about him, or the way I would delineate his character, and I thought this from the beginning. The reader does not have to like him. Remember when I said the car door swings open, he says, "Do you want to ride?" You don't have to like this guy. Trusting someone is not the same as liking him. I just wanted you to trust him. And Harry Bosch, I knew I was going to build him so that he was prickly, that he was hard-edged, that he would do things that would upset people. You know, sometimes he's not a nice guy. And so I always felt you don't have to like this guy. You don't even want to have coffee with him or take him home for dinner. But I wanted the reader to believe that if they had a loved one that had been murdered, or even they themselves had been murdered, they would only want one person to investigate the case, and that would be Harry Bosch, because despite all the things that would make him maybe not someone you want to have dinner with, what I wanted to shine through was his relentlessness and the idea that he would not be stopped in the pursuit of his mission.
You were a crime reporter for the LA Times. Did you cover the Rodney King affair?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Did you like the job of a crime reporter?
I did. I went from being a crime reporter in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which was, a medium-sized town. I think the whole county has about 1 million people. And it was the kind of crime reporting where you're always going out to the scene and you were involved with the police and you get to know them on site and so forth. Los Angeles is a different animal. It's a gigantic, sprawling place. And sometimes, depending on traffic, you could drive an hour and not even leave the city. And so it changed the way you do police work. A lot of it shifted it more towards the telephone, and that was not good. I mean, I enjoyed being in police stations and saying what's going on. I didn't like calling up police stations and saying what's going on. So that was the negative side of being a police reporter in Los Angeles. But the positive side was it's a Hieronymus Bosch painting. There's always weird things going on, and what you write about. Most of there's so many things I wrote about I could never put in a novel because they would make the reader's head come up and say, "Oh, that couldn't happen." When you're writing a novel, you actually have to be more believable than real life. And several times over the years, I've dropped in little anecdotes of real things I knew happened because I was a reporter, and my editor almost all the time goes, "No, this is not believable. No. We have to take it out." And I would just do what he said. A couple times I've fought him and kept stuff in. There was I think it was in Angel's Flight. There was just a little side anecdote about where some guy's telling Harry about a case he was on where it became a legal issue of whether the police had the right to enter an apartment, because when they knocked on the door, someone said, "Come in," and when they came in, they found guns and drugs, and they made arrests, and it turned out it was a parrot that said, "Come in." And that is based on a real case that really happened. And I fought and kept that in, and several times when I was promoting that book, people complained about how my book seems so realistic, and then you do something like that.
After losing full access to information about law enforcement, did you ever change your way of writing?
I didn't change my way of writing, but when I quit being a reporter, I no longer was a threat to police. It's not like I was a threatening guy, but the relationship between reporter and police, especially in Los Angeles, where they're very media conscious, is very clear. I could have friends, I could have sources, but they all knew there was always the 1% chance that I might have to write about them. Like if they're the ones on the Rodney King tape, all bets are off, because it's my job to write about things of public interest, crimes of public interest. And so there was always a little bit of a separation. And once I quit being a reporter and that 1% went out the window, I actually started to enjoy better access to the police department and more stories like The Parrot and things like that.
John Siebel from Las Vegas Mercury says, your early novels were outstanding because of their ins and outs of the underside of the legal system. You agree with that?
That they were outstanding? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, okay.
No, I mean that's one of the things that I thought I could bring to the table. Here I'd been a reporter for about 12 years, and I just kind of knew a lot about the day-to-day practice of law enforcement and law and criminal justice, and kind of how it's a machine that creaks, that doesn't always work. And I thought that was one reason why even though it was Raymond Chandler's work that's made me want to become a writer, I kind of instinctively knew that when it was time when I was ready to start writing novels, I should not try to write a private detective novel. I should write what I had an expertise in, and that was how the police work or don't work, but the procedure and the whole thing. And so the first 4 books I wrote were all Harry Bosch books, and that was a big focus that I wanted to use the edge I had over other writers, that I knew how this stuff worked.
You're president of an organization called the Mystery Writers of America. What exactly do you do? What kind of organization is this? And
well, I go to Washington and have breakfast with George Bush. No,
Nice.
it's what I have is an honorary role, and the reason they gave me that honorary role is that I have a higher profile than many other writers, and I'm supposed to bring attention to the crime novel and how it is supposedly legitimate art, and it's an important part of the literary world, and that should be what I do. It's mostly honorary, and as I told you, I would not answer any of your questions unless you brought it up. That's the kind of things I do.
My last question. The Dutch authorities want to establish a National Bureau of Investigation. Reading, for example, Lost Light, I'm afraid it will never work out between the police forces and the FBI. What do you advise the Dutch?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, first of all, there's obviously a great value in having a centralized way of tracking crime and tracking evidence and so forth. So if the Dutch don't have that yet, they ought to get it. I mean, because most...
They have.
Okay, all right. The problem is the weakness is always in the human chain. You know, when the foibles of humans get involved, that's where you have problems. And that's what I try to put in Lost Light. We have all these new laws that make it better or easier for investigators in my country to do what they have to do. And they also have all these new safeguards to make sure they're not abused. But it only takes one guy, as it does in Lost Light, to abuse the system, to circumvent the regulations, and then you have problems. And so that's, I'm no expert in this stuff. I would just say watch the human scale when it comes to something like that.
Thank you. People in the audience, you have questions for Michael?
Can there possibly be another question? I mean... Yep.
Sir. Yes, please. Yes,
Yep.
please.
Mm-hmm.
There's a statement here that says the ill-fated $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And
No. That is such a particular question. Yeah, is this like in a quote, you mean? Okay. So you mean explain the use of the word ill-fated, or to the compound ill-fated?
Well, ill-fated is different than free will. Okay, so now I read that and I say, what was this one fated to be on?
I see what you mean.
Or is it,
I think you should just read faster and not think about these words. It was probably I agree, it was probably a wrong choice of words, because money should not have a fate, you know, we're free will. I'm against that. See, that's the problem. I was a reporter, and I probably wrote that 100 times as a reporter, the ill-fated this and that, and then I carried it over. But I'm lucky that I can always blame that on copy editors. That, you know, this book gets read by so many people before it gets through, and yet, which book is that? Okay. They always have mistakes. The one I thought it was City of Bones, and in that one, this very important character in it starts out with brown eyes and later has blue eyes, and it got through all the things, but nothing gets through the people on my website. You know, I'm surprised you must not belong to my website, or you would have already asked that question on there. Okay. Is this a word question? Mm-hmm.
and I had all the books to put on the counter and flip through to find out when did she read.
You're talking about the ill-fated Eleanor Wish? Yeah. She left in the first book. She was in and out in the first book. Then I think she came back in Trunk Music. She was in Angel's Flight, and left again in Angel's Flight. This woman, I'm telling you, she's killing Harry Bosch. And yeah, but no, I don't want you to go back to my first book, because you're gonna find a lot of ill-fateds if you start at the beginning. Now no one will ask a question after what I did to him.
Your turn.
Thank you, and welcome to Amsterdam. I just wrote my first history book,
Congratulations.
and I'm really afraid of this coming.
This is a freelance copy editor, I think.
But no, actually, I have a statement in question. I'm an American living here, and really, I applaud your questioning what's going on in the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that you should be at the least bit nervous about the meeting next week with the president. I think he needs to hear more of that.
Oh.
The question I have is, who you're reading now?
Who am I? Okay.
Some of your favorite authors, crime novelists, detective novelists, people like Patricia Cornwell, people like that. Not exactly what you're writing, but in that kind of vein. I wonder if there are any contemporaries that you are reading now.
Yeah, there are. I have to first say, though, that it's hard for me to read crime fiction, and it's kind of like the heartbreak of my life, because I'm writing crime fiction because I loved reading it. And it was, as I say, Raymond Chandler who made me suddenly say I want to be a writer. But now that I write it, it's hard for me to escape in it. And I go through the story and I see the writer at work behind it. And so if I want to like just sit on a beach type book, I usually don't read crime fiction. And so where I used to read maybe 2-3 books a week, I'd be lucky if I'm reading one book a month that's crime fiction. I mean, I continue to read, but I just don't read crime fiction. And, there's a big, crime fiction network in the world and in my country, and so I will hear what's the book to read at the moment. And I don't mean in terms of commerciality, but doing what I'm just maybe starting to do, holding up the mirror. And so in that regard, probably my favorite writer of the moment is George Pelecanos. I just think he's a very courageous writer, and I hate to even say he's a crime writer because I think he's writing about the frayed end of the social fabric in my country, and he's somehow able to take that and put it into crime fiction or revolve it around a crime, and I think he just does it very well. He inspires me, and so he's someone you ought to check out. And on the flip side of that, when I say it's hard for me to escape into crime fiction, I have found that if I read about another country, the police procedures or the language and so forth is just enough different that I can make it. So I read a lot of stuff that comes out of Great Britain, people like Val McDermid, Peter Robinson, Ian Rankin, and these are all people that write great page turners, very competent thrillers or puzzles. They do all those things, but they also have an element of social realism and social reflection that I can draw upon. But ultimately I'm giving you an inadequate question because I write crime fiction, and I'm almost like the last person to ask about who's doing it well, because I have had to go elsewhere for my reading. And you also don't want to come across something that would intrude into what you're doing that might ruin an idea that you might have. And then just in the last 5 years, that's become more of a concern of mine. Because I actually had a couple ideas, and then I read something and it spoiled those ideas. And there's very little that is totally original anymore. So I'm not saying you can't take a similar idea and put your own personal spin on it. That's done all the time, and I have done that, but it just hurts that process if you read somebody's book and it is close to what you want to do. Yes. Sure.
Some time ago in the Netherlands, the statistic was published that of all the crimes reported to the police, only 13% solved. They didn't split them out by category, but I didn't think that homicide was much different. I don't know what the figures are in Fort Lauderdale or Los Angeles, but I assume they're in the same ballpark. How do you relate the real detective who far from always gets his man to the fictional detective who always does?
That's a good question. I would say that when you get a figure as low as 13%, they're putting together everything, and most cities don't even investigate small property crimes. They take a report so you can file insurance. So, burglaries, like in Los Angeles, is the first crime that rates a call back or a policeman showing up. So anything smaller, like someone goes into your garage and steals a lawnmower or something, I guess that qualifies as a burglary, but like maybe steals something out of your car. Most of these things are not even investigated anymore because of the because there's so many of these crimes and there's not enough police to investigate them. So that adds up to lowering the clearance rates. I think in my country, the murder clearance rate is around 78%. It's much lower in Los Angeles. It's somewhere in the 60s. But even still, that means 1 out of every 3 murderers gets away. And you're right. So that's the reality. And then you go into the bookstore, and there's shelves full of murders that are solved. And that actually, you're getting into, I think, one of the reasons why these books are popular, because these books, the world is right at the end of these books. But you're right, it is very difficult, especially for me who came from a very realistic view of the crime novel, because I came from being a reporter, and I can't tell you how many times I wrote about interesting murders and that were never solved, and that I had files on waiting for the time they caught the guy so I could do another really interesting story, and they never caught the guy. And so that is the contradiction between reality and the made-up world of detective fiction. That was one reason why, even though I loved Raymond Chandler's work and it inspired me to be a writer, when I decided to write, I wrote about a cop, because I was a reporter for a total of 15 years, and I never wrote a single story about a private detective solving a murder, yet the bookstores are full of them, you know. So there is that conflict. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I knew if I kept answering questions long enough, I'd get another free beer. So it is strange, and you know, and this is something I thought about a lot, you know, staying in reality. And so I did a book. I think this is interesting to me at least. I did a book, I don't know, I think 6 or 7 years ago, called The Poet. And at the end of that book, the guy gets away. And I think the book was fulfilling, you know, the puzzle was solved, but at the last moment, he gets away. And I wrote that at the same time O.J. Simpson was getting away with murder. And that's because I lived in that city. I knew the cops that were, some of the cops that were vilified, some of them deservedly vilified, but it just really frustrated me how the system was manipulated. So I said, look, it's the standard thing in these books to solve it and restore order, but I'm going to have, in my alternate universe, my fictional world, I'm going to have one killer out there. So my readers will always know there's somebody out there, that sometimes people get away. And that was my little protest, I guess, against the norms. And so that's what I did. And that ended up being my most popular book. This website we've talked about does a survey every year, and every year it's the winner, most popular book, The Poet. And the most often asked question, which somehow Arno didn't ask tonight, is when will I do a sequel to The Poet? And I didn't construct that book to do a sequel. But what I find interesting is I just wrote a sequel to it. And I did that, I think, because of, in some weird way, because of 9/11. Because 9/11 has made our world so uncertain, I became uncomfortable that my fictional world doesn't have all the loose ends tied up, that it is also uncertain. And I just got into this sense that if I made things more certain in this alternate universe, it would help comfort the real universe. And you know, that's very egotistical to think that you could have any kind of say about the real world, but it made me feel good, and it helped me, you know, go on with what I do. So, you know, I know that's not the answer that you were seeking, but that's what I have to say about it.
Please, Monique, you want last question? Okay.
It better be a good one.
Okay.
No.
You talked about Harry Bosch's character, an evolution compared to Archer, you talked about Raymond Chandler and so on. The funny thing is that the person you described between Harry Bosch, Alden, partly in the background, no steady relationship, is exactly the kind of character that fits into this American, but especially Californian crime novel. You know, so you probably know what I'm talking about. Whether it's Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe or Dashiell Hammett, it's always the same person. And at the end, he can solve the most incredible mystery. No one else can do it. And he is as unhappy as can be. No one to ring up. That's it. Why do you think is that such a famous character? A person who's so unhappy always alone.
When I said it better be a good one, I didn't mean one like that I couldn't answer. Yeah. I know, I don't really know. I mean, you're right. I mean, that is the standard model, and it's the model that made me want to be a writer. So, of course, I was going to try to follow in that particular school of the loner guy trying to make sense of the world. And I don't know. There's something very, I don't know what the right word is, romantic or attractive about this character, that it's a character that's kind of like a prince of the city, that he knows what needs to be, what there is to know about the underside of the world, and he lives to fight another day, but he's wounded for it. It's the tarnished knight model, that as Raymond Chandler called it. And you know, I think maybe it's just that there's little touchstones or those little windows I was talking about when I was over there, where we see what we like about ourselves or what we hope is in ourselves in some of these characters. And like, obviously we don't want to be someone who's sad all the time, but we like the idea of someone who overcomes these tremendous obstacles and the long odds to solve a case that maybe no one else can solve, and lives to fight another day, because that's all we all want to do. We want to live to fight another day. And so we get little notes of inspiration. I know that's what worked for me, and that's what made me immediately, upon that 2-week period of reading all these Chandler books, of knowing this is what I wanted to do, because it's something just hooked me very deeply about it. And so here I am. That probably happened to me about 28 years ago, and this book, Lost Light, is the first time I've written a book that's I'm not trying to compare myself to Chandler, but I mean, that is in that model. He's the private detective now. It took me 12 books to get here, but this is the book I decided 28 years ago I want to write.
Okay. Monique?
You will be allowed to drink this beer and many more, but I think it's time to close off, not because, I think you are very comfortable by telling so many of your stories and your inspiration sources, and I was really pleased with your presence here, so thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Arno, for making even more secrets unveiled by asking so many questions, and for your introduction. As I promised, Michael will sign his books later on in the hall, and you have, I think, a chance to maybe ask another question if you like. If you're interested to find out more about the John Adams Institute, there is a table with some brochures, and you can pick up anything you like. And for only 20 euros, you can become a donor, and then you'll enjoy priority booking of all our events. And for next month, October 14th, we'll have some other guests, somebody else from the United States, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and I'm afraid we're already sold out, but she will come again, and then if you're a member, you can come again. So in November, we'll have Pulitzer Prize winning author Jhumpa Lahiri, and I think there will be many more even this year. So it's always interesting to find out about us, and you will find out if you become a member, and you will get the news card. But for now, thank you all for coming here to listen to Michael and to Arno, and have a safe trip home, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.